I'm Natalia Lobach, and this is Change Course. For the newbies, another town, another train. This is our second episode in a 4-episode series for the newbies. And this is where I'm responding to a question I often get asked around, if I'm a new change manager, where do I start? So as the song goes, another town, another train. Lord, give my restless soul a bit of patience. One of the things that gets identified typically in change initiatives and projects that you'll get called into as a new change manager is the change management plan. And this is a collection of big words for a deliverable or something that is actually quite simple. This is where in change management, the boundaries of the practice start to run up against the boundaries of another practice, project management. And this is where a blend of those pieces is sometimes useful and sometimes helpful, especially for when you're trying to communicate the idea or the activities that go along with what you actually do as a change manager, which can sometimes be difficult to articulate or conceptualize. So I named this episode Another Town, Another Train, because I often feel that this is the necessary evil of change management. It's helpful to organize thoughts, feelings, sentiments, thinking, but it can feel quite repetitive. So honestly, as a fairly seasoned change manager, I've been doing this for a really long time. Typically, my change management plans end up looking a lot the same. And so as a newbie, I would advise you not to stress too much about this. Once you have a good conceptual idea or template of how this can work, this is actually pretty easy. So this is something that if you're interested in, as I mentioned in the last episode, there's been a lot of changes in Chart House. We're going to be launching Connected Change really soon. And this is one of the really cool and easy templates that I'm hoping to be able to offer you as something free and easy that you can use. So stay tuned. I'm hoping to have that ready soon to share with all of you. And honestly, once you have done it once, you can repeat it over and over again. And also, this is where you can use a standard and then customize as needed. So the change management plan is really that blend of the project plan and the idea of change management. And it's really all about managing expectations. So when you're thinking about change, there is a blend of activity and deliverable or intervention that you're doing with the group that you're seeking to change. And there's also a sense of, how do you know that the change is progressing? So how do you know that people are changing their thoughts, behaviors, understanding, etc.? So at each phase in the change, you'll want to be able to define where the general group should be in terms of sentiment, understanding, thoughts, behaviors at the end of each phase. And then as you move through, what that should look like at the beginning versus the end. This is where I pull in one of my favorite tools, which is the diffusion of innovation curve. A change management plan is going to look a lot like that. It's going to look like the diffusion of innovation curve. You could even draw it on a PowerPoint slide to show kind of what that looks like, or even just draw the logarithmic curve, the one that just goes up like a hockey stick, that essentially shows the instead of, the diffusion of innovation curve, the bell curve, right, which shows the number of new adherents, right, the normal distribution. As you go through a change, the logarithmic curve actually does the total, right? So 1 to 100%. So you're going up the curve to say, how close are we getting? Are we getting to our goal of 85% adherence? Remember, they're always going to have 15% that maybe just never change, and that's fine. But how are you getting to that 85%, right? And so a lot of change management methodologies break this down. There are different ways to do it. Really, at the end of the day, it's all about managing expectations. So there are different tools that you're going to use in order to make that happen. You will probably be mapping out the different communications or awareness tools that you're going to be using. And then you're also going to be showing where you're going to have specific interventions or specific changes. You're also going to be showing who are your key change leaders. And then, as we've talked about in our previous episode, we are the champions. Who are those change champions? How distributed are they? How are you going to find them, and who are they? So, because change is so much about relationships, how people interact with each other, how people interact with new information, and how people interact within the power structure of the organization, that's really how you're going to structure your plan. So the plan might be in 4 to 5 phases. You're going to have an initiation phase. You're going to have a planning and building phase where you're going to involve people in defining how that change is going to happen. You're going to have a implementation phase, and then you're going to have a transition phase where essentially the change, instead of being a project focus, is going to transition back into operations or return to normal, if we want to call it that, where you're no longer focused on change, that the change is the new normal, the change is the new standard, the change is the new way of doing things, and that is our new baseline. And so those 4 phases are going to have specific activities that go along with them. You're going to be doing a lot of planning and soul searching and listening in that very first phase. You are going to be engaging people as you're moving through that planning phase, as you're experimenting with implementation. Sometimes you might even do a pilot in that early second phase to try things out, to test things, to test multiple hypotheses, to see what works. Especially if you have a lot or diverse opinions or different parts of the organization that are going to have to do things slightly differently in the change, in the change you're seeking to make. Multiple pilots, proof of concept projects, things like that are going to be extremely helpful. Especially too, if you're looking at a longer term transformation, pilot and proof of concept is a really important data gathering phase. And as your changes get larger, your organizations get larger, this is really important to gather data to help you identify the points of success and the points of failure and make changes early on to really align that change with what is going to be successful. So as you're moving out of that second piece where you're testing, trying, listening, working with people to define, you're then going to move into implementation. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the large majority of the activity happens. So up until this point, there's probably been a lot of communication, and you'll want to map those out in a project management type way to identify what communications activities you're going to have. in order to get people ready and understand when the change is happening. What are the specifics they need to know? Who is affected? What are they going to need to do differently? Oh, goodness. I am so sorry for that interruption. On a personal note, I do all of this recording from my home office. And over the last couple of weeks, my husband has been sharing our office. And when we built this office many years ago, we actually did not build it with COVID in our thoughts and in our sights. So we share one office. There is a desk down the middle with one workstation on his side and one on my side. And this week he is working from the home office. So we're in here together, and he has actually stepped out, and I guess he forgot to take his phone with him. So I apologize for that. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So the implementation piece around the communication. So that's where you're getting into those specifics around who, what, where, why, when, and how. And you're also going to want to be talking a lot about the benefits and what's in it for me. As I mentioned in one of my previous episodes, I worked with a client who had a phrase that I loved and have adopted. You hit him with the whiff'em, the what's in it for me. So at the very beginning of figuring out what your change management plan is, you want to identify each of those stakeholder groups. Stakeholder identification is a key component of the change management plan because targeting communications and interventions for specific stakeholder groups is far more effective than trying to look at a blanket approach or, a standard approach for everyone. I typically spend a great deal of time at the very beginning of the change identifying and breaking down those stakeholder populations and really trying to understand them and where they're coming from. And when you're talking about the what's in it for me, or the with them, as you might call it, this is where you really want to understand the benefits of change from the point of view of each of your stakeholders. You also want to talk about and identify the other side. So the what's in it for me if I don't change. And that's an important piece as well. That's where some of the personal or systemic resistance is going to start to come out. So as you understand, and in that early stage, you're going to be doing a lot of speaking with stakeholders. You're going to be doing a lot of trying to understand people's circumstances, where they're coming from, what the specifics around the change are. This is where you're going to want to map out that what's in it for me if I change, and what's in it for me if I don't change. And this is also going to form the key component of those communications in your implementation phase and through the first two early phases. So as you're moving through the implementation, this is also where you may be looking at training as well. So are there skills or are there things that people are going to have to do differently? What learning gaps are they going to have to fill in order to be able to do change the way we need them to do change? The last piece is really transitioning into operations. So how do we make change normative? How do we close the project and move on? And, here too, we're also thinking about motivation. Here too, we're also thinking about how do you overcome that learning curve and help things become normal? How do you integrate this change into the organization? And so this is where you are looking to align the change and the new practices, behaviors, procedures that you have created and bedded down. How are you integrating those into your existing organizational systems? And this is where that systems piece, that ecosystem, that return to homeostasis idea comes in. This is where you're really looking to achieve and sustain and maintain that new normal. This is where you're going to be looking at systemic resistance and trying to work through that and figuring out how to make this change sustainable, not only at a people level, but also at a system level. It's really important that you have to think about the systems as well. So the last thing that I'll mention here is, there's also that component of monitoring and measurement. So when you're thinking about how you're moving people through different phases of change, you are thinking about the behaviors and the practices that they're doing differently, but you also want to be measuring and thinking about how are people thinking? What are people saying? This is where things like focus groups, interviews, survey tools, measurements of how things are happening are really important. And so typically I do measurement at the end of each phase of change, so that that's like a gate that you go through. So you have to understand where you are. And if you're not at the target that you need to achieve, for example, if you're not reaching 85% before you move into sustainment, then you've got to go back and you've got to look at what else you need to do in order to achieve that rate of adoption, that rate of change. So for example, if you're at the end, you're going to have to go back and design additional interventions. You're going to have to go back and look at evaluating and figuring out where some of the breaking points are in order to smooth those over, make them more effective, and bed down that change more effectively. So if you're going to structure your change management plan, thinking about the project management piece of it, so the activities that you're doing, what is the stakeholder breakdown and that stakeholder identification and the key messages that you're developing for each of your stakeholder groups around what's in it for me if I change, what's in it for me if I don't. Also thinking about each of the phases and what you want to achieve at each of those milestones and touch points as you're moving through in the gates from one phase to the next. And what are the monitor and measuring activities that you're doing? At a subset, you're going to have something that looks like a training plan. That one's going to be very project management focused, although you may have in your change management plan an identification of skills or behaviors that need to be adopted in order to show what it is or change what it is that you're seeking to change. But remember, the change management piece is all about how do we go from A to B, point A to point B? How do we deal with course changes? How do we deal with making sure that we're achieving the goals of adoption, the goals of change that we're looking to make? And at a high level, it can be about the concepts and the movement from one phase to another, as well as the roles of each of your key groups, your leadership, your champions, and the people that you're working with to actually bring about that change. I hope that's helpful. Again, once you have a really great template for a change management plan, you should be able to use it over and over and over again. So if you're a new change manager who's coming into this, I would say spend some time, get comfortable with this deliverable. And once you have a really good template and way to work with this, then you're good to go. You can use it over and over and over again. Good luck, and I hope that this was helpful. And as I mentioned, it's just another town and another train, and around sometimes the anxiety that comes with these deliverables and really understanding a deliverable like a change management plan is simply in its most simple form, a communication tool to help leadership understand what it is that they're asking you to do and how you're providing that value. So doesn't need to be anything more fancy than that. It's just a tool. It's just a communication tool. So hopefully in the next couple weeks, as we're doing a lot of change with connectedchange.com, so, keep an eye on that. Hopefully we'll be able to offer you up, an easy to use template here to help you all in your journey as change managers. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, I invite you to like, share, rate, and subscribe because it helps others find us. You can find our show notes on our website at www.charthouse.ca, where each episode has a page under the Change Course podcast. So anything that I referenced in today's episode will be posted there so you can find it. While you're visiting us, sign up for the Change Navigator newsletter. You'll get a monthly dispatch of all things change, what we're working on, and our latest research. Our music is Levity by Emily Klassen. Change Course is available wherever you listen to podcasts. We also have an accessible version on YouTube with fully edited captions. You can find the link to our YouTube channel in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and remember, it's never too late to change course.